able to regress to the rest of the curve using only those 5 data points and try and figure out what the function is. And so you can see here, the green line, there's a very faint green line that you can't actually see on these slides. That shows the function before you did the original vector theta. And then the darker green lines show after 1 and after 10 gradient updates what the function looks like. And you can see that when it's only provided with points that are on the right side of the function, it's still able to learn what the left side of the function looks like based on its prior experience over these satisfied functions. And if you just pre-train a network on all the functions, it's not able to learn these functions very well at all, even when you tune the step size to be optimal for these tasks. We also applied this to few-shot classification on the omniglot data set, and we were able to outperform methods that were actually specifically designed for classification problems, despite the fact that our method is general to regression problems and, as I'll show next, reinforcement learning problems. We also tried this on a 2D navigation task where the tasks were different goals in 2D space. It was trying to learn how to adapt to a new goal in 2D. And lastly, we tried a couple locomotion tasks. In this scenario, there were 2 tasks to move forward and to move backward. This is the policy before the gradient update. This is just pi theta. If we made 1 gradient step on that policy on the task of moving forward, this is the gate that it has, so the cheetah moves forward. It gets a little excited and starts doing cartwheels. If you take a gradient step going backwards, the cheetah is going backwards. This is just 1 gradient step after the first policy. We can also do this and with and, so this is the policy before the gradient update. This is the policy for going right, after 1 gradient update for going right. This is the policy after 1 gradient update going left. And then the other cool thing is it continues to improve as you take more than 1 gradient step, even though it's only trained on 1 gradient step. Thanks. Okay, I think Michael Lasky, I think he sent me some slides on or PowerPoint, so let's do those.
There we go. Okay, so this is work done in Professor Goldberg's lab. The problem we're looking at is imitation learning. So this is kind of like reinforcement learning's cousin, where you have a circuit loss, you want to minimize the expected reward along that. Okay. One approach to view imitation learning is you have some distribution that collects data sample on, then you minimize the loss on that, and then you have to correspond by the term, which is the covariance shift, of how far that distribution was from your robot's distribution, and the expected loss that you received. And then this work, we're going to be looking at sort of like large-scale imitation learning. So when you collect many demonstrations in parallel, for example, like Tesla, we have like thousands of people on the road. But also in the lab, we've been looking a lot like compiling analytical supervisors where you want to run many simulations in parallel at once. If you look at like recent policy methods like Dagger, basically you have these rollouts collecting samples from the current policy, and our hypothesis was as you collect more with the current policy, the total variance is going to grow between the two. And the reason for that is like as you add more data to your model, it's going to become different than your previous model. However, with all policy methods, here you just collect a sample from the supervisor, so this is an all policy algorithm. As you collect more data, you might find the strengths because you're going to become closer and closer to the policy. So the goal was to set the prior concentrating where you're heading, or like use all policy methods, which is sort of my goal. We wanted to set that prior based on analyzing sort of how this term behaves, this covariance shift. And we decided to look at Hellinger distances, which is Lacan's inequality. One of the cool things about Hellinger distances is they don't really suffer from the problem of chaos divergence where you have deterministic agents and they can blow up. So you can actually have nice decoupling. In the work, we first kind of showed some new analysis on the traditional reasons why all policy methods might fail. And we were able to show a bound that was in some cases tighter than the original one. We then used our analysis to design a noise injection term. So we extended it to consider the case where let's inject noise in the supervisor to make sort of conservative prior over our policy method. You can optimize this bound based on how well the robot's doing. So here you have the robot's error, and you basically can optimize our theorem to set the noise term. We then propose an iterative algorithm that would sample from the noise injected supervisor, update the policy, evaluate the policy to optimize the noise term. When we run our method versus just picking some noise to inject in the supervisor, we can actually find that our method converges. And then we test our hypothesis in grid world where you can see as you increase the batch size on policy methods like Dagger actually suffer in performance, but our method being an off policy method can do well. We then went to a more complicated domain, which is a driving similar environment, and we were able to have a similar effect of increasing batch size and be able to maintain the advantage. And future work, we're going to be working with continuous controls. That's about it.
Cut, do you want to do your?
Sure. Well, I will be presenting two papers. The first is Learn to Optimize Neural Nets. So this is a fairly recent line of work. So there's our paper on learning to optimize, and then there's also this paper from DeepMind that just appeared a week later. So the difference is that because there are different notions of generalization. So our paper trains an optimization algorithm on one task, and we test it on right. So this is a very simple formulation. So basically, we're looking at any existing unconstrained optimization algorithm. So the only difference between different algorithms is that they use different update rules, and we just replace that update rule with the neural net. So that's basically, you can consider as a policy. You can consider the state to be kind of the iterate and some other features. The action will be the set vector, and the reward will be the minus of the objective value, if you want to minimize your function. The key observation we make in this paper is that neural nets are equivalent up to permutation of some coordinates. So if you think about the different layers of the neural nets, so you can basically permute the different dimensions or the different units, the different hidden units that would correspond to a different arbitrary permutation of the weight matrix. So basically, the policy should be permutation invariant with respect to those coordinates. And so we use guided policy search to learn a policy, but then we can't really use the standard GPIs because LQR is cubic in the dimensionality, which is prohibitive in the high dimensional setting. So instead, we actually impose a block diagonal structure on the dynamics and share parameters among the different coordinates variants. And the policy is simply a recurrent neural nets with 128 LSTM cells. So for the experiments, we train the optimization algorithm on the experience of training a neural nets on MNIST. And at test time, we use it to train the neural nets on the Toronto Faces dataset, CFAR10 and CFAR100. So this is on TFD. So I guess a couple of interesting things. So first of all, the best performing algorithm other than ours is actually Momentum. And the blue line is the DeepMind method. So ours is the red line that's down below. So it's actually about 5 times faster than Momentum, and I don't know how much faster than all the other methods. So CFAR10 is same thing. And CFAR100, for some reason, it actually turns out to be simpler, so all the methods do pretty well. So here, the DeepMind method does actually work, but our method still does better. Right. So the next paper I'm going to talk about is fast gainer research using via prioritized DCI. Basically, most exact algorithms suffer from a phenomenon now known as the curse of dimensionality. Here's kind of the more recent methods, I would say. The work on this actually goes back to the 1970s, and so these are kind of the state-of-the-art methods here. So you can see that they all suffer from the curse of dimensionality. That is, their running time actually depends exponentially on the intrinsic dimensionality, which you can think of as dimensionality of the manifold from which the data is generated. Here, so DCI is our previous paper, and so here it's actually sublinear, so that the running time depends sublinearly on the intrinsic dimensionality. So in this paper, we further improve the dependence on the intrinsic dimensionality. So because the complexities are kind of hard to parse, so here's a plot.
So you can see, so the red and the blue curves correspond to all the other methods. The green curve corresponds to our previous paper. The orange curve corresponds to this paper.
What is the y-axis?
Oh, running time.
Okay.
Let me go back. Yeah, time complexity. Right, so here's how the algorithm works. So basically, it's very simple. So we have a data set, and so those are shown as the blue points. And so we basically project that all those points along some random directions. So those are kind of the projections are shown in green. And so what we do is essentially at query time, we're going to have a query point, and then we're just going to project along those random directions. So the query point is shown in red, and what we're going to do is we're just going to visit the points along each of the random directions in the order of their projected distance, or projections actually. And so I guess the key principle we rely on here is that the projected distance is always the lower bound on the true distance. So basically, so the UJs are univectors. So if we choose the univectors randomly, and then that's going to intuitively give us a pretty good lower bound on the true distance. So here are the results. So this is on, I believe, CFAR. I can't actually remember. But basically, the green curve is our method. LSH is kind of considered as the previous state of the art. The blue curve is our previous method. So it achieves a 5-fold reduction in the running time, essentially. So on MNIST, it actually achieves a 30-fold reduction in running time. So basically, MNIST is actually harder for retrieving nearest neighbors because the points are much densely clustered. Here is the kind of the memory usage comparison. So our method achieves a 55-fold reduction in the memory usage compared to LSH on CFAR, and a 47-fold reduction on MNIST. Is it?
Okay, let's switch to Igor's computer now.
Does this change? Okay, so do you want me to do
Yeah.
the first one? All right. So I'm going to talk about emergence of grounded compositional language in multi-agent populations. This was work done with Peter. And mostly what we've been using reinforcement learning for in this lab has been goal-driven movement creation. So for example, given a particular goal, an agent or several agents, we try to make them accomplish it. But what we're going to be after in this paper is goal-driven language creation, which is going to be necessary if we want to have, we need to communicate if we want to have a decentralized population of agents. But also as a flip side, the necessity to accomplish goals and coordinate will lead, hopefully, to the formation of language or some other form of communication between agents, much like the laws of physics restrictions kind of lead us towards more interesting behaviors than just like objects flying towards their goal. And in a recent paper, we've kind of argued for this pragmatic definition of language understanding, that an agent understands language only when it can use it to effectively collaborate with other agents. But what kind of languages are we looking at? We'll be looking at mostly at abstract languages that are not necessarily English, but still have interesting structures, we'll see. So we're going to be focusing on 2D environment and using kind of the standard multi-agent reinforcement learning setting, except in addition to physical actions and observations, we're also going to have kind of these verbal, be able to utter abstract communication symbols and observe abstract communication symbols. And so let's see how this works for a simple scenario. Let's say I have 2 agents, and agent 0 wants agent 1 to go to a particular landmark, and agent 1 wants agent 0 to go to some other landmark. We're going to see that they'll utter some communication symbol the core that actually we can interpret as corresponding to the landmark name or identification. And then they'll stay silent because what they've heard was committed to memory, and there's a penalty for just like uttering the same thing over and over again. And we'll see that they end up achieving the goal. And this actually consistently happens, and they actually consistently use the same vocabulary. You can also extend multiple goals, like look at scenarios, in addition to just movement action. And we're going to see emergence of abstract symbols, but that they can be interpreted as like go to red, or just blue, which kind of means look at blue. And again, these vocabularies are consistent. And when you actually have multiple agents, see how it goes. Now they need to refer to each other. It's not just like you or I. So we actually see, like here, I've labeled the text for human readability. These are abstract symbols. Like they don't have any particular meaning in optimization, but we'll still see languages forming with the case. It's like blue agent, go to, or look at, red landmark, or green landmark. So there's actually compositionality emerging in this language, and we actually see that the vocabulary usages end up being converging to something that is appropriate for the task at hand. We also observe nonverbal communication forming, like let's say you have kind of a silent teacher that can't speak now, and kind of a student, and the student needs to reach the goal. But we see the teacher kind of moving towards that location and using it to guide, or potentially like pointing scenarios where it's the other one can interpret the student's gaze, the teacher's gaze, and the teacher basically just gazes at the right location. And even when no communication is possible, we get things where it's like, it's a blind student, the teacher just pushes the student towards the location because there's no communication. So anyways, yeah, these are pretty cool, interesting results. I'm excited about the future. I guess Mark.
I'll be talking about some work I did with Sergey and some people down at USC. I'll try to keep the explanation kind of short so I can show some more cool videos at the end. And hopefully that'll convince you to read the paper, which will be more informative than me trying to explain the whole thing to you like I did too. So the motivation behind this work is we want to learn complex tasks, hopefully from scratch, on real complex dynamic systems. And here data efficiency is crucial. And a lot of model-based methods are typically much more efficient. However, they suffer from modeling bias, especially for more complex, hard-to-model physical systems. And so that's where model-free methods excel because they have minimal bias. So the question is to combine the benefits of both. And some prior work has looked at combining model-based and model-free methods. But for real robots, we need even greater efficiency than what we've been able to achieve so far. So our approach is to actually focus on a specific policy representation known as time-varying linear Gaussian controllers. And these policies, the nice thing is that they emit a very efficient model-based update and a very simple model-free update that are both easy to combine in order to achieve our final goal. And so basically we use the model-based update to efficiently make large improvements in the policy, while the model-free update corrects for the bias that's introduced by this model-based update. So the model-based update specifically that we use is this LQR-based method that has been shown to work very well in the past, essentially by linearizing the dynamics and approximating the cost quadratically. And you can see that it learns from scratch some pretty complicated tasks. However, the performance degrades with its modeling errors. The model-free update that we use is known as pi-squared, which can solve some very complex tasks that involve discontinuous dynamics like opening a door. However, it's not really efficient enough to be able to learn from scratch, so they have to be initialized from demonstration. So some of the experiments that we do in simulation, for example, involves this gripper that has to move this white block into a red goal. And you can see that when we just run this model-based method, it works sometimes, but then the modeling error gets in the way for more complex situations. Pi-squared, even when we train with 10 times more samples than we do for the other methods, is not efficient enough to make that much progress. However, our method is both sample efficient and able to capture the complex dynamics of this task. We also try things like simulated door opening. And here we actually train a single neural net policy using guided policy search. So whereas we need a different linear Gaussian policy for each time we move the robot, we can train a single neural net that's going to be able to open the door from any initial position that we give it. Onto some real robot tasks. So here, this robot's trying to plug in this power plug. And this is just showing the final policy that we trained with our method. It's given 10 samples per iteration for 25 iterations, so using 250 episodes, which if you are familiar with previous RL methods, that's really, really tiny. And it's able to consistently plug this in, which is actually a pretty difficult task due to the extreme precision that you need. This video wasn't working, so I'm gonna see if I can show it here.
You just bring your mouse over to the other screen and double click, it should be fine.
Sorry?
If you just bring your mouse over to there,
Oh.
it might be
bring my mouse over for a second.
Is it in the Google
Double
Drive?
click on that, yeah.
If it's in the Google Drive, maybe.
Yeah, let me just show you something really quickly. So here it's learning how to hit a hockey puck into a goal. A policy that we trained that can actually succeed even when we move the goal into several different positions. Yep. So you can see my colleague moving the goal, and it's still able to. Oh, I missed that time, but it's usually able to hit the goal into the puck into the goal. Cool. All right, so I'll stop there.
Let's have Sandra.
Sorry. So I'll give you guys a brief overview of the paper that Roy and I were working on for this Icml. And this is about automatic discovery of deep options from demonstrations. So just kind of the motivation is most of the reinforcement learning tasks that we're really interested in have like a long sequence of temporal structure, right? You have to have, again, a long sequence of actions just right before you can see any reward. These are kind of the interesting sequential problems, right? In these Atari games like Sequest or say robotic surgery, there are these kinds of long sequences that you really build upon each other. So the one challenge is that, especially in the early stages of learning, once an agent discovers one of these sequences for the first time, in future iterations, you might interrupt what you've kind of learned just because of the nature of exploration. Right? You've learned this piece to get to this really complex high-value state, but you might end up interrupting it in exploration. Like, for example, in the Sequest, you might learn that your exploration policy might just tell you to do exactly the wrong thing, and then you might not get to the state again for a very long time downstream. So we'd really like a way for agents to automatically reuse subcomponents of what they've learned already. And this is really related to this framework called the options framework from Sutton, Precup, and Singh, where the idea allows you to abstract skills and modularize skills that an agent knows. And for the purposes of this work, we consider options that are essentially two tuples of policies and termination conditions. And so the question that we started asking is, in these high-dimensional spaces, how do we automatically discover these options? Whether from observing a reinforcement learning agent and seeing what kinds of trajectories are coming out of it, or from, say, human demonstrations in these robotic tasks. And our basic idea is to kind of build on the imitation learning framework, but consider a slightly different generative model. Instead of thinking about imitating an agent exactly like a flat hierarchy, we can start thinking about what happens if there's a meta policy that generates these trajectories that calls low-level policies until some sort of a termination condition is met. And you can actually turn this into a likelihood formulation and try to figure out how do we optimize for this, how do we optimize for the parameters of this. It's essentially a gradient descent with some additional steps that essentially go forward, backward, update to fill in all the latent variables that we don't observe to basically assign them to the different options and parameters. And we can layer these things and do like and layer them into hierarchies of other hierarchies as well. Think about options that call other options, and we have this meta algorithm that allows for layer-wise training of this. And there's kind of an interesting decoupling argument that makes us allow us to scale this kind of in a really interesting way. So our initial results, we were sort of still in the process, this paper raises more questions than answers, and I'm trying to understand what's going on here. And when we run this with some of these Atari benchmarks, we see some very interesting behavior where we can look at the first time the agent starts earning some rewards, use that as a stopping point, use that as a point where we can start building options from the agent's behavior and augmenting the action space for future iterations. We actually see some really interesting results, especially on some of the harder tasks like Sequest and Gopher, where there is this kind of sequence over there. So that's kind of cool. And going forward, we're actually really interested in some theory here. Deep options or deep hierarchies, like is there a difference between them? Are they the same? Are they equally representative? Kind of an interesting problem.
Okay, Jacob.
Thanks. So yeah, this is work with Sergey and with Dan, and I'm really glad that Sanjay went right before me because what I'm going to be talking about right now is kind of the dual problem to what we were just talking about there. So we're also interested here in learning kind of hierarchical representations of policies. Here we're looking at a kind of multitask setting. So say we're playing some kind of like toy Minecraft game. One day my agent wakes up and it has to make planks, which it's going to do by like getting wood somewhere and then taking them to someplace in the environment. Maybe some other day the agent wakes up and it has to make sticks instead, which also involves getting wood and then going to some different place in the environment. And what we want to be able to do is learn sort of policies that allow us to do all of these things efficiently and to generalize efficiently to new tasks once we're exposed to those. And so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be providing a little bit of extra supervision in the form of what we call policy sketches. And these policy sketches are basically like high-level, essentially symbolic representations of the kinds of behaviors that we want the agent to exhibit, right? So in addition to whatever reward signal is kind of natively in the environment, this agent is also going to be told, well, on this first task, number one, you're doing two things. The first thing is called get wood, and the second thing is called use workbench. And that's it. We're not going to say anything about how to recognize when you've gotten wood or how long it should take or sort of intermediate rewards or anything. Just this sort of high-level symbolic annotation and so on for all of the other tasks that we have in the environments. You know, I don't need to motivate option learning because we did this already. And just to kind of put this in schematic terms, you can think of what Sanjay was talking about before as we're going to supervise the bottom here. We're going to start with sort of rollouts from some existing policy and try to extract abstract structures from those. Here we're just going to provide supervision at the top without any information about how those things are supposed to get implemented and try to fill in all of the implementation details instead. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and so in particular, the way that we're doing this is we basically set up a model that looks kind of like an existing unsupervised options learning model. But for each of these tasks, it's going to walk along each of these sketches. It's going to associate every term in one of these sketches with some kind of modular policy, whether that's a totally independently parameterized neural net or something that we've like plugged a sort of task embedding, subtask embedding into. And then you can just train this thing end to end using essentially a normal actor-critic method. It in fact works pretty well out of the box. There's a bunch of extra stuff you can do to kind of fine-tune it to the particular supervision setting that we have here to do better. But yeah, and you know, basically the takeaway is that on a bunch of different multitask settings, using just this little bit of extra supervision that we get in the form of these policy sketches, we're able to do a lot better than kind of sort of trying to jointly learn all of the things with some big monolithic policy or previous state-of-the-art methods for using for doing sort of unsupervised option discovery. And again, once we've learned these things, we can also use them to generalize to new tasks, both in a kind of zero-shot setting where you get the task, you get a sketch for the task, and you have to immediately do well using that sketch, or something where you actually don't get sketches anymore. You have to just sort of totally unsupervisedly discover the new high-level policy. These experiments didn't make it into the Icml paper, but you can do continuous control with this as well for a sort of family of little cliff walking tasks where you have to stay on. Sorry, I'm out of time. And the real essential thing here is that there's like very, very little information in these sketches, very few bits on top of whatever work you're already doing in the learning process. And so this is a really easy way to get pretty dramatic improvements in performance on complicated tasks. Thank you.
Okay. Did anyone else here other than Deepak need to present and not get a chance to? Okay. I can't. Okay. Deepak is actually saying to let Paul present. Okay.
So this is joint work with Alyosha and Trevor, and of course Deepak. So our goal in this work was that if you have a reinforcement learning agent and if you put it in an environment and you have no rewards, what can this agent do, right? So one typical thing is the agent can be curious, and by being curious, it can learn some sort of skills, right? So one typical way how people measure skills is to say, I'm going to predict what's going to happen next. And if I can't make a good prediction, then something which I cannot model, and I'm trying to be curious about that thing. But this formulation has a couple of major issues. First, like building density models over images is hard. And even if you could build it, if you have dynamic objects in the environment, such as something is moving around, then it's very hard for probabilistic or any kind of density-based models to capture those modes. So agent can get curious about things which are randomly moving in the environment and just get stuck over those modes. And so the whole idea about our work is to like make predictions in a feature space so that we only get curious about things which are relevant and we don't get stuck into such kind of bottlenecks, which are like sort of like objects which are moving around, which you cannot directly control for. So just for an example, this is a video of an agent in Wisdom, which is kind of doing random exploration. So as you see that once you train this agent, like once you just have this agent, we just get stuck in a wall. Right? This is just an agent initialized in Wisdom doing random exploration. And now we'll contrast this. Now we'll contrast this with an agent which was like trained using a curiosity-based reward. So as you can see that this agent can do navigation. It can kind of show some behavior which is representative of navigation without requiring any reward. So it can kind of navigate through hallways, and if it kind of gets stuck near walls, it tries to kind of move outside these walls and then find its path. So I just let this run for some time. so yeah, so right now it finds out the path there. Okay, so how does this work? So it's like the standard RL framework where you have states, and this is not very clear, but you have states and you have some policy which produces some actions. You get some reward from the environment which can be there or not be there, and you have some intrinsic reward which you also get, and that intrinsic reward is given by this module which we call as Icml, which is a curiosity module. And the way the curiosity module works is that you have a pair of states, my current state and my next state, and from these pair of states, you encode them into some feature representation using a neural network. From this feature representation, you try to predict some actions. And then you do predictions in this particular feature space, and the error in this feature space gives you some signal of the reward. So because we are doing predictions in a feature space, which depends on the action, we kind of are not affected by any dynamics which are happening in the environment, which are not affected by the agent directly. I guess. And then I'm out of time, but I'll just show you some more results. So if you just take the Wisdom task, and we are comparing how well a method does. So the goal is to reach over here, and you randomly spawn anywhere in the map. So the blue is H3C, and the orange is our method on top of H3C. And we can also make the task very, very hard, where the agent is always initialized from one room. So by random exploration, you can't really go there very often. So you will see that H3C always fails, and we can do reasonably well. So I will skip this video, but I guess it's playing. We're just comparing like our method against just vanilla H3C. So H3C kind of gets stuck, and we can go through and reach the goal. So yeah, I guess
You're out of time. That's it.